Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into a world where palace corridors echo with whispered secrets, silk curtains flutter gently, and the scent of incense mingles with the ocean breeze just beyond the Great Walls. You find yourself standing in ancient China's forbidden city, but not as a noble or a general. Instead, you're one of the most curious figures in imperial history, a eunuch, trusted servant, and secret power broker. Now, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You probably won't survive the palace intrigues of ancient China without learning a few tricks. But tonight, we're here to gently unravel the odd career of the empire's eunuch explorers. Let's begin at the very beginning, when eunuchs first carved out their unusual place in Chinese history. Eunuchs, castrated men who served within the imperial court, might seem like a strange starting point for stories of grand voyages and mighty fleets, but their origins date back thousands of years. From as early as the Zheng Dynasty, roughly 1600 BCE, eunuchs were already part of the royal household, acting as personal attendants to the emperor and his family. The key reason? Because they were considered safe around women of the palace and loyal to the throne, eunuchs were often entrusted with delicate duties that others might balk at. Imagine being a palace servant navigating maze-like corridors filled with silk-draped chambers, all while bearing the mark of a strange, permanent sacrifice. It's a life that demands fierce loyalty, strict discipline, and a certain acceptance of an identity unlike any other. But eunuchs were not mere servants. They often became powerful advisors, administrators, and gatekeepers to the emperor. Historians still argue whether their influence was more a product of their personal cunning or a structural necessity in a society that feared the mingling of the emperor's family with unchecked nobles. What makes eunuchs particularly fascinating is their unique social role. They were neither fully men in the traditional sense nor women, occupying a liminal space that allowed them access to both the intimate inner court and the broader political stage. This ambiguous status, while isolating, gave them unexpected power. By the time the Ming Dynasty rose in the 14th century, eunuchs had transformed from mere palace aides to political heavyweights. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, picture the dusty, sunlit courtyards of the early imperial palaces where these men first started learning their strange, secretive trade, setting the stage for the adventures that would one day span oceans. A quirky tidbit to drift off with, ancient eunuchs sometimes wore special robes with hidden pockets designed to conceal secret messages or tiny tools, a sort of ancient spy kit. So next time you picture a eunuch, imagine him with a few tricks up his sleeve, quietly steering the course of history. As we settle into the story, remember that the eunuch's beginnings were humble, mysterious, and full of contradictions. A fitting start for what comes next. Section 2. Rise of the Ming Dynasty and Eunuch Power. As the early morning sun spills softly over the rooftops of the Forbidden City, the world of the Ming Dynasty begins to stir. A world where power often wears the face of unexpected people. You step through towering gates and find yourself in a palace humming with energy, where eunuchs have moved beyond servants to become true power players. Tonight, we'll unravel how eunuchs rose to prominence during the Ming era and the subtle ways they shaped the fate of an empire. The Ming Dynasty, established in 1368, was a time of renewal for China. After overthrowing the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty, the Ming emperors wanted to restore Chinese traditions and assert control over their vast realm. But controlling such a sprawling empire wasn't easy. The emperor couldn't personally oversee every corner, so he relied heavily on trusted officials. Among these were the eunuchs, who by this period had grown in both number and influence. You might wonder, why eunuchs? After all, castration is a harsh price to pay, and many would question their role beyond serving in the harem. But eunuchs occupied a unique position. Because they couldn't have families of their own, they were perceived as less likely to develop personal power bases that could challenge the emperor. This made them seemingly loyal and controllable. But as history shows, loyalty is never so simple. The Ming court quickly learned that eunuchs, with their close access to the emperor, could become gatekeepers, controlling who reached the ruler, what messages were passed, and which ideas were heard. They were both shield and sword, protecting the emperor's privacy but also shaping palace politics. Picture this. A eunuch in brightly colored robes glides silently down a silk-lined corridor, his presence barely noticeable except to those who know to watch. Behind the scenes, he is reading letters, delivering orders, and sometimes deciding which noble's petition should see the emperor's eyes. The emperor might never meet many of the officials who ran the provinces, but he would know these eunuchs well. Their influence stretched far beyond mere palace chores. Historians still argue whether eunuchs' rise was the emperor's design or the result of their own ambition and savvy. Some believe emperors deliberately empowered eunuchs to counterbalance the scholar official class, the bureaucrats who often competed for control and were seen as a threat. Others argue eunuchs exploited their unique position, building networks and wealth in ways that sometimes undermined the state. Whatever the truth, by the 15th century, eunuchs held unprecedented sway. One of the most remarkable examples was the rise of powerful eunuch families, even though eunuchs themselves could not father children. These families were often supported by eunuchs who adopted relatives or protégés, creating informal dynasties within the palace. This created a complex web of loyalties and rivalries that rivaled any noble house. To understand this better, imagine the palace as a small city, bustling with intrigue. Eunuchs formed their own factions, jockeying for influence over the emperor and control of lucrative government posts. Some eunuchs became wealthy landowners and administrators, far removed from the menial duties most people imagined. Of course, with great power came great suspicion. Eunuchs were often blamed for corruption, palace scandals, and political disasters. Some emperors distrusted them deeply, leading to purges and dramatic falls from favor. Yet despite these risks, eunuchs continued to shape Ming politics for over 2 centuries. One quirky detail you might enjoy. Eunuchs often wore distinctive hairstyles and accessories to signal their rank. Some sported long fingernails like natural talons, both to display their status and because they rarely performed physical labor. This became a subtle yet visible reminder that they were above ordinary work and deeply embedded in court life. But beyond hairstyles and robes, eunuchs wielded real power. They controlled the imperial workshops, managed the palace treasury, and even led armies when necessary. The emperor trusted them with secrets and missions others could not be trusted with. This trust would soon lead to a remarkable chapter in history, the age of the eunuch explorers. Before we sail into those stories, let's take a moment to consider the cultural backdrop that allowed eunuchs to rise so high. Ming China was a society deeply rooted in Confucian values, emphasizing hierarchy, loyalty, and filial piety. Scholar officials, educated in Confucian classics, traditionally dominated the government. Eunuchs, however, were often viewed as outsiders despite their influence. Their outsider status meant eunuchs had to be cunning and discreet. They couldn't openly challenge scholars but found ways to navigate palace politics skillfully. In some cases, eunuchs served as mediators between the emperor and the bureaucracy, smoothing conflicts and relaying information. Historians still debate whether eunuchs were a necessary counterbalance to prevent any one group from becoming too powerful, or whether their unchecked influence contributed to the eventual weakening of the Ming Dynasty. In this delicate dance of power, eunuchs sharpened their skills in diplomacy, administration, and sometimes even military command. These skills would prove crucial when the emperor entrusted them with a new and unprecedented mission, sending Chinese fleets across the oceans. Before we get there, imagine the day-to-day life of a powerful eunuch in the Ming court, waking early in a richly decorated chamber, reviewing scrolls detailing imperial orders, meeting with generals and diplomats, and carefully planning palace affairs while maintaining an air of humble servitude. It's a role demanding both patience and ambition. And speaking of ambition, eunuchs often use their position to patronize artists, scholars, and craftsmen, leaving behind a cultural legacy beyond politics. Their influence shaped everything from architecture to literature, adding a subtle layer to Ming cultural history. Another curious fact: eunuchs sometimes acted as the emperor's personal spies, traveling secretly to distant provinces or foreign lands, gathering intelligence. This role foreshadows the voyages of exploration they would soon lead, blending diplomacy and espionage. As the Ming Dynasty matured, the stage was set for eunuchs to step beyond the palace walls and into the wider world. Their power had grown, their skills sharpened, and the emperor's trust deepened. So as the palace bells chimed softly in the evening, remember, these eunuchs were not just palace shadows, they were the empire's hidden hands, shaping history in quiet but profound ways. The next step in our journey will introduce a remarkable figure born from this unique world, Zheng He, the eunuch whose voyages would captivate the world and forever change China's place on the seas. Section 3. Zheng He's early life and eunuch training. The story now turns to a young boy named He, born into a modest family in the southwestern province of Yunnan during the early Ming Dynasty. You might think of him as just another boy growing up in a time of great change, but his path would be anything but ordinary. He's journey to becoming Zheng He, the famous eunuch explorer who would lead the greatest fleet the world had ever seen, is a tale woven with fate, hardship, and extraordinary opportunity. From the start, He's childhood was marked by upheaval. Born into a Muslim family with a rich cultural heritage, he grew up at the crossroads of diverse peoples and ideas. This mix would later influence his open-mindedness during the vast voyages ahead. You can almost smell the spices and hear the languages blending in the bustling marketplaces where young He played. When the Ming armies expanded to Yunnan, He was captured during a military campaign against local warlords. This grim event marked a turning point. Instead of fading into obscurity, He was castrated and sent to serve in the imperial court as a eunuch. The practice was brutal, but it was also a chance, a peculiar kind of ticket into the very heart of China's power. Now imagine yourself as a young boy in He's place. The physical pain is only part of the story. The psychological impact of castration, the sudden uprooting from family and home, and the daunting palace life would shape anyone's soul. But He adapted. He learned the palace's rhythms, mastered its etiquette, and grew both physically and intellectually under the watchful eyes of his mentors. The Ming court had strict training for eunuchs. You had to be able to read and write, manage finances, understand military matters, and navigate the delicate politics of the palace. He proved exceptionally skilled. His intelligence and discipline caught the emperor's attention. The emperor at the time, Yongle, was a man of vision and ambition. He saw in He a loyal servant, and perhaps something more, a capable leader to carry out the empire's bold plans. The emperor's trust wasn't given lightly, especially to someone like He, whose origins were humble and outsider status clear. Yet, the emperor recognized that eunuchs like He could be valuable agents, freed from the distractions of family ties and noble ambitions. Historians still argue whether Ma He's rise was solely due to his talent or also owed to the emperor's preference for eunuchs as political tools. Either way, the transformation from captured boy to powerful eunuch was remarkable. During his training, Ma He learned many skills that would prepare him for command: navigation techniques, shipbuilding knowledge, foreign languages, and diplomatic protocols. These were not common skills for eunuchs, but Yonggle's court was different, its eyes set on the distant horizons. One quirky tidbit to keep in mind: eunuchs like Ma. He sometimes carried special fans, not just for cooling, but also as symbols of authority. These fans could be ornately decorated and used to give commands silently, a handy tool during the chaos of a shipboard command. As Ma He matured, he was given the new name Zheng He, a common practice to mark a eunuch's status and new identity within the palace. With this name, he stepped fully into the role of trusted imperial servant and eventually naval commander. His Muslim background also gave him a unique advantage. Ming China was opening to the world, and Zheng He's knowledge of different cultures and languages made him an ideal envoy. He could navigate the complex waters not only of the sea, but also of diplomacy, bridging worlds that others in the court could barely imagine. Think of Zheng He standing on the deck of a massive ship, gazing toward the horizon with the confidence of someone who has overcome incredible odds. He was not just a eunuch, he was the embodiment of the emperor's dreams for China's future. The Ming Dynasty was at a crossroads. The empire had secured its borders, rebuilt its economy, and restored its traditions. Now it sought to project its power beyond land into the vast oceans. This was where Zheng He's training and unique skills became crucial. Before the massive voyages began, Zheng He served in various court roles, gaining experience and trust. He oversaw construction projects, managed grain shipments, and learned how to lead men. His command style was a blend of strict discipline and careful diplomacy, traits necessary for the delicate balance of power on the seas. Historians still debate how much of Zheng He's role was truly military and how much was ceremonial or diplomatic. Some suggest his voyages were primarily about showcasing China's wealth and influence, while others emphasize their strategic importance in controlling trade routes and alliances. Regardless, Zheng He's early life is a story of transformation. From a captive boy to an imperial eunuch, from outsider to trusted commander, his journey is as extraordinary as the ships he would one day lead. Another intriguing fact: Zheng. He was said to have been exceptionally tall, some accounts suggesting he stood well over 6 feet, a giant among the men of his time. This physical presence may have added to his authority on the decks and in the courts he visited. As we imagine young Zheng He preparing for the voyages ahead, it's worth remembering the personal sacrifices behind his success. Being a eunuch meant a lifetime of unique challenges, yet it also opened doors few could dream of. So, the stage is set. The boy who once played in Yunnan's markets is now ready to command the largest fleet the world has ever seen. The Ming Emperor's trust, the skills learned through hardship, and the dreams of a vast empire converge in one man. Next, we will explore how these vast treasure ships were built, massive floating palaces designed to carry China's ambitions across the seas. Section 4. The Ming Treasure Fleet emerges. Now that Zheng He has emerged from his humble beginnings and rigorous training, let us turn our gaze toward the grand vessels that would carry him and his fleet across the great oceans, the Ming Treasure Fleet. Imagine standing on the bustling docks of Nanjing or later, the newly established maritime capital at Suzhou Creek in Shanghai, surrounded by the noise of hammering, the scent of fresh-cut timber, and the excitement of building something truly unprecedented. These ships were more than vessels. They were symbols of China's power and ambition. The Ming Treasure Fleet was unlike any navy the world had seen before. At its peak, it included hundreds of ships, ranging from enormous treasure ships to smaller escort vessels. The treasure ships themselves were colossal. Contemporary Chinese records claim these ships were up to 400 feet long and 160 feet wide, dwarfing any European ships of the time. However, modern historians debate the exact sizes. Some archaeological evidence suggests the ships were smaller but still impressively large, especially for wooden sailing ships. Regardless of exact measurements, it's easy to picture these floating palaces with multiple decks, towering masts, and sails made of tightly woven canvas. They could carry hundreds of crew members, sailors, soldiers, artisans, diplomats, and of course, eunuch officers like Zheng He himself. Building such ships required enormous resources. Thousands of skilled carpenters, blacksmiths, and laborers worked tirelessly to cut and shape the finest teak and fir wood, prized for its strength and durability. The construction took years and involved intricate designs to ensure the ships could endure long voyages through unpredictable seas. One particularly interesting detail is how the Chinese engineers designed the hulls with watertight bulkheads, compartments separated by sturdy walls. This innovation meant that if one part of the ship was damaged and flooded, the water wouldn't spread to other sections, greatly improving safety. This design was centuries ahead of similar features in Western shipbuilding, and a testament to the advanced naval engineering of Ming China. Imagine walking through the decks of a treasure ship. Below, rows of cabins where crew and officers rested, storerooms filled with treasures, silks, porcelain, spices, and precious metals, ready to be gifted or traded in far-off lands. Above, the great sails billowed as the ship caught the wind, steering the fleet toward unknown horizons. These ships weren't just transport vessels, they were floating cities. There were kitchens preparing meals for thousands, workshops for repairs, and medical areas staffed with doctors and herbalists. The crew included navigators skilled in reading the stars and ocean currents, sailors adept at handling the massive sails, and soldiers ready to defend against pirates or hostile forces. The scale of the fleet is hard to overstate. Some voyages reportedly included over 300 ships and more than 27,000 men. It's like organizing a modern city to sail the seas with all the logistics and challenges that entails. Historians still argue whether the treasure ships were truly as large as some accounts suggest. No full remains of these massive ships have been found, leading some scholars to think the records may have been exaggerated. Yet, whether exactly 300 or 200 feet long, they were impressive by any standard, capable of carrying enormous cargo and crews. Funding and maintaining this fleet was a massive undertaking. The Ming treasury poured vast amounts of gold and silver into shipbuilding, crew wages, and provisioning. Some court officials criticized the expense, arguing the voyages were luxury displays that drained resources. Others believed the expeditions were vital for projecting power, protecting trade routes, and establishing diplomatic ties. The treasure fleet's purpose was multifaceted. Officially, it was to impress foreign rulers, secure tribute, and establish China's dominance in the Indian Ocean. But it was also a diplomatic mission and a way to gather intelligence about distant lands. These voyages opened direct contact between China and kingdoms as far as East Africa, the Middle East, India, and Southeast Asia. One fascinating detail is that the fleet carried not only soldiers and sailors but also scholars, interpreters, and skilled craftsmen. These experts helped build bridges between cultures, translating languages, recording maps, and fostering understanding. This was diplomacy on a grand, moving scale. You can almost hear the clatter of construction tools, the smell of fresh wood mixed with salt air, and the chatter of shipwrights as they worked tirelessly to complete these marvels of engineering. To visualize the treasure ship's size, picture a modern football field stretched out on water. That's roughly the length some ancient records describe. On board, there were huge wooden columns, carved balustrades, and colourful flags fluttering in the breeze. But these ships were not just big, they were carefully designed for ocean travel. Their broad beams gave stability in rough seas, while the multiple masts allowed complex sail configurations to catch the wind efficiently. The crew navigated using compasses, stars, and even the flight of birds, a combination of technology and natural signs. The logistics of sailing such a fleet were mind-boggling. Provisioning thousands of men with food and fresh water, managing waste, keeping morale high, all on a ship surrounded by endless ocean, required meticulous planning. The fleet stopped at ports along the way to resupply and rest, building networks of friendly harbours and allies. Interestingly, some historians suggest that the fleet's impressive size may have been partly ceremonial, to awe foreign rulers and demonstrate China's grandeur. The treasure ships carried lavish gifts, fine silks, porcelain vases, exotic spices, and even live animals to cement diplomatic relations. This show of wealth and culture was as much about soft power as it was about military strength. However, not everyone welcomed the fleet's presence. Pirates and rival kingdoms saw the massive ships as threats or prizes. The fleet had to be ready to defend itself, blending diplomacy with military readiness. The story of the treasure fleet's construction also reveals much about Ming society. The state mobilized a huge workforce, drawing on skilled artisans and laborers from across the empire. Shipbuilding centers became hubs of innovation and craftsmanship. At the same time, this massive investment reflected the Ming Emperor's ambitions to restore China as place as the world's leading power. The fleet was a floating testament to the empire's wealth, technological prowess, and desire to connect with the wider world. As you imagine the ships slowly taking shape on the riverbanks, consider the human effort behind them. The carpenters carving timbers, the sailmakers weaving huge canvases, and the crew practicing drills for the voyages ahead. It's a grand picture, but also one filled with tension. Such a vast fleet could not be built or maintained without controversy. Court officials debated endlessly over costs, priorities, and the risks involved. This debate would resurface again and again as the voyages unfolded, influencing their fate and the empire's maritime future. Before we sail with Zheng He and his fleet, remember this. The Ming Treasure Fleet was not just a collection of ships, it was a floating empire in itself, built on the sweat, skill, and dreams of thousands. And with that, we prepare to follow the fleet as it sets sail on its first voyage, venturing into uncharted waters and crossing paths with distant peoples and cultures. Section 5. Setting Sail. Zheng He's first voyage. The day finally arrives when the mighty Ming Treasure Fleet, under the command of Zheng He, pushes away from the shore, beginning a journey that will carry them across vast oceans and into the annals of history. Imagine yourself standing on the crowded docks, feeling the salty breeze on your face, the sound of wooden hulls, creaking sails fluttering in the wind, and the low murmur of thousands of voices, sailors, soldiers, craftsmen, and eunuch officers alike, each playing their part in this grand adventure. The first voyage set sail in 1405 from the port city of Nanjing, then the imperial capital. The fleet was composed of around 300 ships, carrying nearly 28,000 men. It was an enormous armada, dwarfing any European fleets of the time. The largest treasure ships boasted 9 masts and dozens of sails, with decks wide enough to hold a small market. As you step aboard one of these ships, you notice the bustle of activity. Sailors haul ropes, the cooks prepare meals in large kitchens, and soldiers polish their weapons. You smell the blend of wood smoke, salted meat, and fresh sea air. The fleet is a world unto itself, a floating city with its own rules, routines, and rhythms. Historians still debate the exact makeup of the crew, but it likely included navigators skilled in astronomy, translators fluent in various languages, doctors knowledgeable in herbal medicine, and even artists who recorded the voyage through paintings and poetry. The crew was diverse, representing many parts of the empire. The Ming Emperor, Yongle, had ambitious goals for this expedition. The fleet was not just a show of naval strength, it was a diplomatic mission designed to impress foreign rulers, establish tributary relations, and expand trade networks. Zheng He was to represent the glory of the Ming Dynasty and bring back gifts and knowledge from distant lands. As the ships left the familiar coastline, the excitement mixed with tension. Sailing such a large fleet through uncharted waters was risky. Storms, navigational errors, and potential attacks from pirates or hostile kingdoms loomed as dangers. Yet, Zheng He's leadership and the crew's discipline held them steady. Navigation in the early 15th century relied on a mix of traditional techniques and emerging technology. The Chinese had developed the magnetic compass centuries earlier, and its use was crucial for keeping the fleet on course. Navigators also used celestial observations, reading the stars and sun's position, along with the flight patterns of birds and the color of the water to judge their location. The fleet's route was carefully planned but flexible, stopping at friendly ports along the coasts of Southeast Asia, India, and beyond. Each stop was an opportunity for diplomacy and trade, as well as resupply. You can imagine the crews resting ashore, trading goods, sharing stories, and learning about strange new cultures. One quirky fact about these voyages is that the ships often carried exotic animals as gifts, giraffes, zebras, and even elephants, to present to foreign rulers. These animals fascinated the people they met who had never seen such creatures. It was a kind of soft power, a way to awe and impress. The scale and sophistication of these voyages were unmatched at the time. For example, the ships used multiple sails and masts, allowing them to harness the wind efficiently and maneuver through various sea conditions. Their hulls, with watertight bulkheads, gave them resilience in storms and battles. Despite the risks, the fleet's discipline was impressive. Zheng He and his officers enforced strict rules to maintain order, hygiene, and morale. The crew's daily life was regimented with scheduled meals, work shifts, and religious rituals. Maintaining morale was crucial on such long journeys far from home. Throughout the voyage, the fleet encountered numerous challenges. Storms battered the ships, navigation errors led to detours, and occasional conflicts with pirates or hostile states tested the fleet's readiness. Yet, Zheng He's diplomatic skills often turned potential enemies into allies. The fleet's arrival at various ports was always a grand spectacle. Foreign rulers were treated to lavish gifts and displays of Chinese culture and technology. Tribute missions were formal affairs, with rituals and ceremonies emphasizing the Ming Emperor's superiority and benevolence. One of the most famous stops was at Calicut on India's west coast, a bustling trade hub. Here, Zheng He engaged with local rulers, traded silk and porcelain for spices and precious gems, and negotiated safe passage for future fleets. The voyages also brought back invaluable knowledge. Zheng He's men recorded maps, wrote detailed accounts of the peoples and lands they visited, and brought exotic goods to China. This exchange enriched Ming culture and economy. However, these voyages were not mere sightseeing tours. The fleet carried soldiers to protect its interests and could respond to threats. Some historians argue that these missions were early forms of naval power projection, asserting China's dominance in the Indian Ocean. Interestingly, the fleet also established Chinese communities and influence in some foreign ports, planting the seeds for centuries of cultural exchange. The legacy of these voyages can still be seen in the descendants of Chinese communities in Southeast Asia and beyond. Historians still debate the motivations behind the voyages. Some see them as pure diplomacy and trade missions. Others argue they were strategic military expeditions aimed at controlling maritime routes and checking the influence of rival powers. As the fleet returned to China after months at sea, it brought with it treasures, knowledge, and tales of distant worlds. The voyages captured the imagination of the Ming court and common people alike, becoming legendary. Yet beneath the grandeur, the voyages were expensive and controversial. Some officials questioned the costs and risks, fearing the distraction from internal affairs. These debates would influence the future of China's maritime policies. Imagine the celebrations as the fleet docked, crews reunited with families, and the emperor received reports. The success of the first voyage paved the way for 6 more expeditions over the next 28 years. Through it all, Zheng He remained a loyal servant, skilled commander, and master diplomat, guiding the fleet through unknown waters and unknown peoples. So, as you imagine the fleet setting sail from the Ming shores, remember the blend of ambition, courage, and careful planning that made this journey possible. Next, we'll explore the exotic lands, peoples, and cultures that Zheng He's fleet encountered, bringing the world to life in new and surprising ways. Section 6: Encounters with Distant Lands. As Zheng He's fleet pushes further from the familiar shores of China, the vast ocean becomes a stage for countless encounters with distant lands and diverse peoples. Picture the vast blue stretching endlessly, the wind catching the great sails, carrying thousands of sailors toward unknown horizons. These voyages were not just journeys over water, they were cultural voyages, bridging worlds separated by geography, language, and tradition. The fleet's first major stops often included the islands of Southeast Asia, places like Java, Sumatra, and the Malay Peninsula. These were thriving hubs of trade, where merchants from many nations mingled, exchanging goods and stories. Imagine bustling ports alive with the scents of spices, cloves, nutmeg, and cinnamon, the vibrant colors of silks and carved ivory, and the mingling voices of traders speaking Malay, Tamil, Arabic, and Chinese. The local rulers greeted Zheng He's fleet with a mixture of curiosity and respect. The arrival of these giant ships was a spectacle, and their size and splendor left lasting impressions. To the locals, these visitors represented the wealth and power of the distant Ming Empire. The fleets often engaged in elaborate ceremonies, presenting gifts and sharing rituals that fostered goodwill. In one vivid scene, the crew might disembark amid grand palaces with gold-trimmed roofs, surrounded by lush, tropical gardens. Exotic animals brought as gifts by the Chinese caused wonder among the people. Creatures like giraffes and zebras, unlike any found locally, inspiring awe and even reverence. As the voyages progressed westward, the fleet reached India's western coast, visiting important ports like Calicut and Cochin. These cities were vibrant marketplaces, hubs of spices, textiles, and precious stones. Picture the chaotic, fragrant bazaars lined with traders selling pepper, cardamom, silk, and pearls, and the mingling of Hindu temples, mosques, and churches reflecting diverse faiths. Zheng He's envoys not only traded goods but also exchanged ideas. The mingling of Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, and Confucian beliefs enriched the cultures on both sides. Local rulers saw the fleet as both a source of valuable trade and a symbol of China's might, making diplomatic ties with the Ming court desirable. Sailing further west, the fleet reached the Arabian Peninsula and the bustling port of Aden, a crossroads for traders from Africa, Asia, and Europe. The crew experienced new architectural styles, whitewashed buildings with intricate arches, and vibrant markets filled with frankincense, myrrh, and precious metals. In many ports, Zheng He's Muslim heritage helped smooth relations. His knowledge of Islamic customs and languages made it easier to build trust and conduct diplomacy. The fleet sometimes participated in local religious ceremonies, showing respect for diverse cultures and beliefs. Continuing to the east coast of Africa, the fleet visited city-states like Mogadishu, Malindi, and Kilwa. These ports thrived on trade routes connecting Africa's interior to the wider Indian Ocean world. Imagine coral stone buildings shimmering under the sun, bustling marketplaces trading gold, ivory, and spices, and local peoples encountering the enormous treasure ships for the first time. local rulers often welcomed the fleet with lavish ceremonies, fascinated by the exotic gifts and animals they carried. Chinese silks and porcelain found eager buyers, and the exchange of goods helped build long-lasting relationships. The voyages created a network of trade and diplomacy linking China to faraway continents. This web of connections fostered economic growth and cultural exchange on an unprecedented scale. However, these encounters weren't without challenges. Language barriers, differing customs, and political tensions required the fleet's diplomats and translators to be patient and skilled negotiators. There were occasional misunderstandings and disputes, but Zheng He's leadership ensured peaceful outcomes. Imagine the nights spent anchored under starlit skies, sailors sharing stories of far-off lands and curious traditions. The crew's experiences broadened their horizons, changing how they viewed the world. Historians still debate the depth of China's influence on these regions. While the voyages expanded trade and diplomacy, many foreign rulers retained their independence, negotiating terms favorable to their interests. Nevertheless, the cultural and economic ties forged by the fleet had lasting effects. Chinese goods and ideas spread widely, and foreign influences found subtle expressions in Chinese art and society. The voyages enriched both China and the lands they touched, weaving a complex tapestry of global connection long before the modern era. But to truly understand these encounters, let's dive deeper into some of the most remarkable interactions along the fleet's route. Consider the island of Java in present-day Indonesia, a place teeming with life where traders from across Asia converged. Zheng He's ships arrived amid vibrant ceremonies with local rulers eager to strengthen ties with the powerful Ming court. The Chinese envoys brought silk and porcelain, marvels to the Javanese people, who in return offered spices like nutmeg and cloves, unknown in many parts of China. The cultural exchange went beyond goods. Chinese artisans shared techniques in ceramics and metallurgy, while local dancers performed their traditional arts for the fleet's crews. Similarly, in Malacca, another key port on the Malay Peninsula, Zheng He's fleet played a crucial role in consolidating the city's power. Malacca was emerging as a strategic trading hub between the Indian Ocean and South China Sea. The fleet's presence helped suppress piracy and solidify Malacca's reputation as a safe harbor, encouraging merchants to settle and trade. This fostered economic growth that would shape the region for centuries. Moving westward, the Indian ports offered their own tapestry of cultural richness. Calicut, ruled by the Zamorin, was a city of remarkable diversity. Hindu temples stood alongside mosques, reflecting centuries of religious coexistence. When Zheng He arrived, the Chinese envoys not only exchanged gifts, but also participated in dialogues on religion and governance, learning about the complexities of Indian society. The fleet's presence also influenced local politics, sometimes mediating conflicts between rival rulers. Further along the Arabian coast, the port city of Aden was a melting pot of cultures and commerce. Its strategic location on the Red Sea made it a vital gateway between Africa, Asia, and Europe. Zheng He's fleet brought news of the Far East and opened channels for trade in frankincense, myrrh, and precious stones. The mutual respect between Chinese envoys and Arab traders fostered alliances based on trust and benefit. The African coast presented a whole new world for the fleet. The city-states of East Africa were prosperous and culturally rich. Kilwa, for instance, was renowned for its gold trade. When the treasure ships docked, the local people marveled at the massive vessels and their exotic crews. Chinese gifts such as silk and porcelain fascinated the locals, while the exchange of goods helped create lasting bonds. The fleet's visits contributed to the spread of Chinese cultural motifs in African art and architecture, evident even centuries later. Yet these encounters were not always smooth. Language differences often led to misunderstandings. The fleet relied on interpreters, some recruited from previous voyages, who spoke multiple languages. Diplomats had to navigate delicate cultural norms, ensuring that neither side offended the other. Political tensions also surfaced. Some local rulers feared losing autonomy or resented the tribute system China imposed, which required acknowledgement of the Ming Emperor's supremacy. Zheng He's diplomacy was crucial in managing these tensions, balancing respect with clear displays of power. Despite challenges, the voyages opened minds and hearts to the vast diversity of the world. For the sailors and officials aboard, these experiences broadened their understanding, exposing them to new foods, music, customs, and belief systems. At night, sailors gathered on deck, sharing tales of distant lands and imagining the lives of the people they had met. These stories, passed down among crews, helped weave the human fabric of the voyages. The impact of these encounters continues to be felt today. Cultural exchanges influenced cuisine, art, religion, and language across the Indian Ocean rim. Trade routes established by the fleet remained active for centuries, fostering economic and cultural connections. Historians continue to explore the full extent of China's influence during this period. While the Ming Empire never sought to colonize these regions, their diplomatic and commercial presence shaped local histories in subtle but lasting ways. As you imagine these grand ships docking under foreign skies, the laughter and chatter of mingling peoples, and the exchange of goods and ideas, remember that Zheng He's voyages were not just about imperial power. They were about humanity reaching out across oceans, seeking connection and understanding. So as you drift into sleep tonight, let your dreams carry you on these ancient waters, sailing among distant shores where cultures met, mingled, and changed forever. Section 7. Diplomatic Gifts and Cultural Exchanges. As Zheng He's fleet continued its remarkable voyages, one of the most crucial tools for success was not just the size of the ships or the strength of the crew, but the art of diplomacy, especially the delicate practice of gift-giving and ceremonial exchanges. Imagine yourself at the heart of these encounters, observing how the eunuch explorers used tact, patience, and generosity to build bridges across cultures, winning allies and opening doors where force might have closed them. In the early 15th century, international relations were often shaped by displays of wealth and respect, and the Ming Dynasty understood this well. The Emperor's gifts were carefully chosen to dazzle foreign rulers and demonstrate the empire's grandeur, wealth, and technological superiority. These exchanges were not mere luxury, they were political tools designed to establish China's role as the dominant power in the known world. Picture the moment when Zheng He's fleet arrives at a distant port. Local rulers, dressed in their finest robes and jewels, come to greet the envoys. The air is thick with anticipation. The eunuchs carry gifts wrapped in silk and gold, ready to present to kings and sultans who have never before seen such offerings. The gifts themselves were impressive and varied. They included fine silks that shimmered in the sun, delicate porcelain bowls painted with intricate designs, rare spices and incense, precious metals like gold and silver, and even live animals, elephants, camels, and giraffes, that were as much symbols of power as exotic wonders. These living gifts often left foreign courts in awe, sparking stories and legends that lasted for generations. One fascinating detail is that the gift-giving was highly ritualized. There were protocols about who could give what, in what order, and how recipients should respond. Missteps could cause offense or damage fragile alliances. Zheng He and his officers were trained to navigate these nuances with care and respect, ensuring each interaction reinforced China's prestige. This careful diplomacy extended beyond material gifts. The eunuchs performed ceremonies, exchanged letters, and sometimes participated in local festivals or religious events, showing a willingness to engage with and honor different cultures. In many ways, these diplomatic missions resembled grand theater, with each side playing roles to uphold honor and status. But beneath the surface, Real political negotiations were underway, treaties were signed, trade agreements made, and promises of mutual support exchanged. You can almost hear the quiet murmur of translators working tirelessly to bridge language gaps, the rustle of embroidered robes as emissaries bow and exchange smiles, the clinking of porcelain cups during shared feasts. Historians still debate the true extent of these diplomatic efforts. Some see Zheng He's voyages as primarily ceremonial displays meant to impress, while others highlight their strategic importance in securing alliances and trade routes vital to the Ming Empire's prosperity. One quirky tidbit you might enjoy is that in some cases the eunuchs had to give gifts to foreign rulers that were so rare or valuable that they had to be specially made or acquired just for the voyage. For example, silks woven with gold thread or porcelain painted with special glazes were reserved for the most important recipients. Moreover, some foreign rulers reciprocated with gifts of their own, exotic woods, spices, precious stones, and sometimes even texts and maps that expanded Chinese knowledge of the wider world. These exchanges helped create a network of relationships extending from the coasts of Africa to the islands of Southeast Asia. The gifts symbolize not only wealth but also mutual respect and recognition of sovereignty. In addition to formal diplomacy, the voyages helped facilitate trade. Ports visited by the fleet became safer and more open to merchants, fostering economic ties. Chinese merchants gained access to spices, textiles, and precious goods that enriched domestic markets. The eunuch's role was essential here. They were the trusted agents of the emperor, able to negotiate deals, settle disputes, and represent Chinese interests abroad with authority. Interestingly, Zheng He's Muslim faith may have aided diplomatic relations, especially in Islamic regions. His understanding of Islamic customs and languages helped smooth interactions and built trust, showing how cultural knowledge was as important as military power. The fleet also carried detailed records of these diplomatic encounters. These writings provided invaluable information for future missions and helped the Ming court understand the complexities of international politics. Despite the grandeur and success, these diplomatic efforts were not without challenges. Some foreign courts were suspicious of Chinese intentions, while others had rivalries or internal conflicts that complicated negotiations. The eunuchs had to be skilled mediators, balancing firmness with tact. At times, diplomacy required subtle shows of strength. The fleet's military capabilities were known, and the presence of armed soldiers underscored that China could defend its interests if needed. Yet, open conflict was rare, as the emphasis was on peaceful exchanges. As you imagine these scenes of ceremonial gift-giving, think of the care and attention behind every gesture, the fabrics chosen, the words spoken, the expressions exchanged. It was a world where symbolism mattered deeply. Historians continue to study the nuances of these interactions, with some suggesting that Zheng He's diplomacy laid foundations for long-lasting peace and cooperation in the Indian Ocean region. In summary, the art of diplomacy on these voyages was as vital as the fleet's firepower or navigational skill. Through gift-giving, ceremonies, and respectful engagement, eunuchs like Zheng He forged connections that transcended language, religion, and distance. So, as you drift to sleep imagining silk-wrapped treasures, grand ceremonies under foreign skies, and the quiet diplomacy of eunuch explorers, know that this delicate dance helped shape a world more connected than many realize. Up next, we'll dive into the storms and threats the fleet faced, natural and human alike, as it navigated the challenges of the high seas. Section 8. Challenges at Sea, Storms, Pirates and Politics. The ocean feels calm beneath your feet. The warm breeze brushes gently against your skin, and above you stretches an endless blue sky. It all seems peaceful, inviting even. But as Zheng He's fleet sailed farther from the familiar coasts of China, they quickly learned that the sea can be a harsh and dangerous place. Fierce storms raged, pirates prowled the waters, and tricky politics at home created challenges that echoed across the waves. Tonight, you all journey with the fleet as it faces these many threats, both from nature and from humans, and see how these eunuch explorers steered through danger with courage and cleverness. Let's begin with the most obvious challenge, the weather. The Indian Ocean and surrounding seas are famous for sudden storms and powerful monsoons, seasonal winds that can be both helpful and deadly. Imagine standing on the deck as dark clouds gather quickly, giant waves rise like mountains, and wild winds threaten to tear the sails apart. For sailors used to rivers and calm coastal waters, these were terrifying experiences. Because the fleet's ships were so large, some the biggest wooden ships ever built, moving through storms was difficult. While these treasure ships were stable when the seas were calm, controlling them in violent weather took skill and teamwork. The crews worked non-stop, pulling in sails, securing goods, and steering carefully through the churning waves. Chinese sailors had learned to understand the monsoon winds well. They timed their voyages to catch these winds, using nature to speed their journeys or avoid the worst dangers. But even with careful planning, storms could still surprise them, breaking masts, flooding decks, or tossing ships like toys. An interesting fact is that the fleet carried special tools like sounding lines to check the water's depth and early versions of rudders to help steer. These inventions gave them an edge, helping them survive storms that might have destroyed smaller, less equipped ships. Historians still argue about how many ships were lost to storms, but records mention some vessels sinking and sailors drowning. This reminds us that despite all the glory, these journeys were risky and full of real danger. But nature was not the only threat. Pirates roamed the Indian Ocean, attacking merchant ships and sometimes daring to challenge even the mighty Ming fleet. Imagine the tense moments when rumors spread of pirate ships nearby. The crews had to stay alert, ready to defend their ships with bows, crossbows, and cannons. Soldiers trained constantly, prepared for battle at any time. Pirates knew the fleet carried valuable treasures, fine silks, rare spices, gold, and precious gems, and attacking these ships promised big rewards. But Zheng He's fleet was no easy target. Its size, firepower, and strict discipline made it a fearsome opponent. There are stories of fights where the fleet defeated pirate groups, sometimes using smart tactics or overwhelming force. The soldiers aboard the ships were not just for show. They protected the fleet and kept order among the sailors. Their presence was crucial for survival in dangerous waters. Beyond pirates, the fleet also faced challenges from politics, both abroad and at home. Many kingdoms welcomed the fleet as a sign of friendship and power. But some rulers were suspicious or saw the fleet as a threat. Sometimes diplomatic disagreements almost led to conflict. For example, in some ports, local leaders feared losing control or becoming minor players under China's tribute system. The Ming Empire expected tribute from foreign rulers, which some saw as a loss of independence. To handle these situations, Zheng He's diplomats used careful negotiation, sometimes backing words with the presence of armed ships. This balance of peaceful talks and readiness for defense was a key to the fleet's success. Back in China, politics were also complicated. Different groups at the Ming court argued about whether the voyages were worth their huge cost. Some officials criticized the fleet, saying it wasted resources that could be better spent defending the country or improving farming. These political fights sometimes led to less support for the fleet, making planning and sailing harder. You can almost hear the quiet whispers in the palace halls, officials debating whether to invest in empire building or focus on pressing home problems. These debates shaped the future of the voyages. Life aboard the ships had its own challenges. Long months at sea caused tiredness, sickness, and homesickness. Keeping the crew's spirits high took strong leadership. Doctors on board had limited knowledge but used herbal medicines and traditional treatments to heal wounds and diseases. Cleanliness was important to prevent illness spreading in crowded quarters. Another interesting detail is that sailors carried lucky charms, burned incense, and kept religious objects to protect against bad luck. Superstitions mixed with practical habits helped them cope with dangers. Storms, pirates, politics, and human struggles tested the fleet's strength every day. Yet under Zheng He's command, the crew faced these trials with determination and teamwork. This story reminds us that behind the grandeur of the fleet were real people confronting real dangers on every voyage. Historians still discuss how much these challenges affected the size and number of later journeys. Some say these risks made court officials less eager to continue sending fleets. As you picture the fleet pushing through wild storms, fending off attacks, and managing tricky diplomacy, think of the courage and cleverness needed to keep such great dreams afloat. Next, we will explore how these voyages reshaped trade networks and brought new wealth, goods, and ideas back to Ming China. Section 9. The Eunuch Explorer's Role in Trade Networks. As the waves gently lap against the mighty hulls of Zheng He's fleet, you might imagine that their journeys were simply grand displays of power or diplomatic goodwill. But beneath the pomp and ceremony lay a more practical purpose, expanding and strengthening the vast web of trade networks that linked China to the wider world. In this section, we'll explore how these eunuch explorers helped reshape commerce across continents, bringing new goods, wealth, and ideas to Ming China. Imagine the bustling markets of the early 15th century, port cities alive with merchants from distant lands, shouting their wares, displaying exotic goods, and negotiating deals that would ripple through economies thousands of miles away. This vibrant trade was the lifeblood of many regions, and China was eager to play a leading role. Before Zheng He's voyages, trade routes across the Indian Ocean and beyond were already busy and complex, but often fragmented and risky. Pirates, political instability, and natural challenges made long-distance trade difficult. The Ming Treasure Fleet, with its massive ships and official backing, brought a new level of security and organization to these networks. The fleet's visits to foreign ports helped establish safer passages for merchant ships. Local rulers, impressed by the might and prestige of the Ming Empire, often guaranteed protection and privileges for Chinese traders. This created more reliable routes, encouraging commerce and investment. One vivid image to imagine is the scene in ports like Calicut, Malacca, or Aden. Merchants from China, India, Arabia, and Africa mingle, exchanging silks, spices, precious stones, ceramics, and rare metals. The presence of the Ming fleet elevates these interactions, lending them an official, secure atmosphere. Through these exchanges, China imported valuable commodities like pepper, cloves, sandalwood, pearls, and precious gems, items not found in China but highly prized by its elite. At the same time, Chinese products such as silk, porcelain, lacquerware, and tea found eager markets abroad. The fleet's large cargo capacity allowed for the transport of immense quantities of goods, making trade more efficient and profitable. This scale of exchange boosted not only wealth but also cultural and technological diffusion. Historians still debate whether the voyages were primarily diplomatic missions or designed to secure economic dominance. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. The Ming court sought to showcase its power while also encouraging trade that enriched the empire. Interestingly, the fleet also helped introduce new products and agricultural goods to China. Some scholars suggest that certain crops, such as coconuts and sugarcane varieties, spread along these routes. The exchange was not one way. China both imported and exported innovations. Another intriguing fact is that the fleet's voyages helped stabilize political relationships critical for trade. By reinforcing tributary ties, the Ming Empire ensured that key ports remained friendly and cooperative. This diplomatic backing gave merchants confidence and reduced the threat of conflict. On board the treasure ships, officials kept detailed records of goods traded, markets visited, and contacts made. These reports were invaluable for planning future voyages and understanding the economic landscape. Moreover, the fleet's presence disrupted existing monopolies and opened new opportunities for merchants from diverse backgrounds. Chinese traders, including many from southern coastal regions, gained access to ports previously closed or dangerous. The increased trade also influenced urban development in port cities. Many grew in size and wealth, becoming cosmopolitan centers where cultures mixed, languages blended, and innovations flourished. It is fascinating to think that the echoes of Zheng He's voyages still linger in the vibrant multicultural cities of Southeast Asia and East Africa, where descendants of these early contacts live today. Of course, not all trade was peaceful or equally beneficial. Some regions resented Chinese dominance and rival powers sought to challenge Ming influence. The fleet's armed presence helped maintain order, but also sometimes provoked tensions. Additionally, the sheer scale of trade raised logistical challenges. Managing storage, taxation, and distribution of goods required sophisticated administration. Back in China, the influx of exotic goods stimulated demand among the elite and fueled the luxury economy. Porcelain and silk, once rare and precious, became symbols of status and refinement, often decorated with motifs inspired by foreign designs. The economic benefits also reached beyond the court. Ports, shipyards, and merchant communities thrived, creating jobs and encouraging technological advances in navigation and shipbuilding. Historians continue to explore the complex economic impact of Zheng He's voyages. Some argue that while the expeditions were costly, their role in expanding trade and cultural exchange justified the investment. Others suggest that domestic priorities should have taken precedence. One curious detail is that the fleet's voyages predated and in some ways rivaled the famous explorations of Europe by decades. While Columbus was still years away from crossing the Atlantic, Zheng He was already commanding a fleet connecting continents across the Indian Ocean. This makes you wonder about the different paths history took and the possibilities of what might have been had China continued these maritime ambitions. As you imagine, the bustling trade hubs, massive ships unloading their treasures, and merchants negotiating deals. Remember that Zheng He's voyages were not just about grand spectacle, but also about weaving together a network of commerce that shaped the world. Section 11. The fleet's later voyages and waning influence. The voyages that once dazzled the world began to change. The great Ming Treasure Fleet, once a symbol of unmatched power and ambition, saw its influence fade as the political winds shifted in China. The later expeditions, though still impressive, grew smaller, less frequent, and faced new challenges that hinted at the empire's changing priorities. Tonight we'll trace this gradual decline, watching how the tides turned against the eunuch explorers and their vast fleets. Imagine the scene at the imperial court after the death of Emperor Yongle, the great patron of the Voyages. His successors lacked his enthusiasm for maritime adventures. Court officials, especially the scholar official faction, gained more power and began questioning the value of the fleet. Concerns about the high cost, risks, and necessity of these missions grew louder. The early voyages, with their huge ships and thousands of crew, were expensive and logistically complex. As the 15th century progressed, the imperial treasury faced competing demands, from defending borders to funding agriculture and civil administration. The extravagant fleet seemed less justifiable to many in power. You might picture palace meetings filled with tense discussions. Some officials advocated for continuing the voyages, emphasizing their diplomatic and economic benefits. Others argued that resources should focus inward, protecting China from threats like the Mongols and supporting farming communities. This debate wasn't just about money, it was about the empire's vision of itself. Should China be a global seafaring power or a self-sufficient empire focused on its vast land and traditions? Meanwhile, the fleet's later voyages reflected this changing mood. The scale diminished, ships were smaller, crews fewer, and journeys less ambitious. The grand treasure ships, once the pride of the fleet, were no longer built. The voyages lacked the grandeur and spectacle that had impressed foreign courts before. Zheng He himself died in 1433, shortly after leading his 7th voyage. His death marked the end of an era. Without his leadership, the fleet lost its most capable and trusted commander. Later voyages lacked the same unity of purpose and leadership. The eunuchs who led them faced increasing opposition. Their political rivals sought to curb their influence and redirect resources. You can imagine the fleet sailing with less fanfare, fewer ships, and less support. Morale among crews likely waned, and the complex logistics became harder to manage. During this period, the Ming government began issuing edicts limiting maritime activity. One such decree banned private overseas trade, reflecting fears that uncontrolled sea commerce threatened the empire's stability. This policy had a chilling effect on the fleet and on China's broader engagement with the maritime world. Historians still debate the reasons behind these changes. Some argue that the rise of threats on land demanded attention and resources. Others suggest that political rivalries and ideological shifts favored a retreat from overseas ambitions. Economic factors also played a role. The costs of the voyages were immense, and some officials believed the benefits did not justify continued expense. Furthermore, natural disasters and changing climate may have affected coastal communities and shipbuilding industries, making maritime ventures more difficult. Despite the decline, the legacy of the voyages persisted. Trade continued along established routes, cultural exchanges flourished, and Chinese communities abroad grew. But the government's withdrawal from active maritime exploration signaled a turning point. China's focus shifted towards internal development and defense rather than outward expansion. This retreat was gradual but profound. For centuries afterward, China limited its naval capabilities and maritime ambitions. One curious aspect is that while China stepped back, European powers like Portugal and Spain were gearing up to explore and colonize distant lands. The Ming voyages predated these expeditions by decades, but China chose a different path. Imagine the what-ifs. What if China had continued its seafaring adventures? How might history have changed? The later voyages also faced logistical challenges. Maintaining a large fleet required vast timber supplies, skilled labor, and stable administration. As interest waned, the quality of ships and crews may have suffered. Additionally, the loss of experienced leaders and changing court dynamics weakened the fleet's coherence. Even as the official expeditions ended, Chinese sailors, merchants, and fishermen continued to travel, trade, and settle abroad. Their presence left cultural footprints in Southeast Asia, the Indian Ocean, and beyond. In summary, the fleet's later voyages were marked by diminishing scale, shifting priorities, and growing opposition. The era of grand maritime exploration faded, giving way to a more inward-looking empire. As you picture the treasure ships growing smaller, sails furling earlier, and the ocean horizon narrowing, feel the weight of history's currents, how ambition, politics, and economics steer the fate of nations. Next, we'll dive into historians' debates about the voyage's true impact, exploring different perspectives on this remarkable chapter of maritime history. Section 12. Historians debate the voyage's true impact. Zheng He's voyages stand as some of the most extraordinary maritime expeditions in world history, yet centuries after they ended, historians remain divided on their true significance. Were these journeys transformative events that reshaped China's role in the world, or were they elaborate diplomatic pageantry with limited lasting impact? Tonight, we will explore these differing perspectives in detail, considering evidence, interpretations, and the ongoing debates among scholars. At first glance, Zheng He's expeditions appear overwhelmingly impressive. The fleets were enormous, sailing thousands of miles across the Indian Ocean to reach distant lands in Africa, the Middle East, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. The voyages established tributary relations, traded vast quantities of goods, and brought back exotic treasures and knowledge. They connected China to a broader world, seemingly positioning the empire as a global power. Supporters of the idea that Zheng He's voyages had a deep and lasting impact highlight several key points. They argue that the expeditions expanded China's commercial reach dramatically. By opening secure maritime trade routes, the fleets facilitated the exchange of goods such as spices, precious stones, textiles, ceramics, and metals on an unprecedented scale. These goods fueled China's economy and enriched cultural life, with foreign influences visible in art, cuisine, and technology. Moreover, these historians point to the diplomatic dimension. The voyages created a network of tributary states that acknowledged the Ming Emperor's supremacy in exchange for protection and trade benefits. This network reinforced China's influence across the Indian Ocean and encouraged political stability in key regions. The fleets also projected military power, deterring piracy and rival states. Zheng He himself is often seen as a visionary leader whose diplomatic skills and navigational expertise helped cement China's role as a dominant maritime force. His Muslim background enabled cultural bridge building, particularly with Islamic states along the route, fostering mutual respect and cooperation. Some scholars emphasize that these voyages predated European global explorations by decades, demonstrating that China was a pioneer in early globalization. The Ming Treasure Fleets embodied a model of peaceful power projection based on diplomacy and trade, contrasting with later European colonization driven by conquest and exploitation. Yet despite these compelling arguments, many historians challenge the notion that Zheng He's voyages fundamentally altered China or the wider world. They view the expeditions as extraordinary but ultimately fleeting spectacles that lacked long-term strategic vision or economic sustainability. These critics note that after Zheng He's death and the cessation of the voyages in the mid-15th century, China largely retreated from maritime exploration and limited its overseas contacts. The Ming government issued bans on large ships and private foreign trade, signaling a shift away from global engagement. They argue that the tributary system imposed by the Ming was often more ceremonial than practical. Many foreign rulers remained effectively independent, using tributary status as a diplomatic convenience rather than true submission. Thus, China's influence was limited in scope and depth. Furthermore, some scholars question the true size and scope of the treasure fleets, suggesting that Chinese records exaggerate the numbers and sizes of ships and men. The absence of archaeological evidence for the largest treasure ships fuels skepticism. The voyage's cost was enormous, straining the imperial treasury and provoking opposition within the court. The scholar-official faction, favoring Confucian agrarian values and wary of overseas distractions, gained influence and curtailed maritime ambitions. Some historians see the voyages primarily as a display of imperial prestige and political theatre, a way for the emperor to assert dominance symbolically rather than to pursue lasting economic or territorial gains. Additionally, the limited impact on world trade is highlighted. While the fleets opened and secured trade routes, they did not establish permanent colonies or control key choke points. Trade continued to be dominated by Arab, Indian, and later European merchants. The debates extend to Zheng He's personal role. Was he a loyal executor of imperial will, or an ambitious eunuch seeking to build his own power? Did his voyages promote peace and cooperation or mask China's aspirations for dominance? These questions remain open, reflecting the complexities of interpreting historical evidence and motivations. Another layer of debate concerns why China ended these voyages despite their apparent success. Various explanations include shifting political priorities, economic constraints, fears of piracy and rebellion, and ideological opposition to maritime trade. Some scholars suggest the voyages represented a missed opportunity. If China had continued exploring, it might have altered global history, perhaps limiting European dominance. Others argue the decision to focus inward was pragmatic, emphasizing internal stability and defense. The impact of the voyages on the regions visited is also debated. While some foreign societies welcomed the Ming fleets and benefited from trade and diplomacy, others viewed them cautiously or resisted Chinese influence. Cultural exchanges did occur, with Chinese goods and ideas influencing art, technology and cuisine in Southeast Asia and East Africa, while foreign religions and customs found echoes in China. Yet the absence of lasting political control or colonization suggests limited imperial reach. Modern historians use a variety of sources, Chinese imperial records, foreign accounts, archaeological findings, to piece together the story. However, these sources can be biased or incomplete, making definitive conclusions difficult. The Voyages' legacy is thus a blend of monumental achievements and unresolved mysteries. They represent an extraordinary chapter in world history, showcasing early global connectivity, cross-cultural exchange, and the complexities of empire. In reflecting on Zheng He's voyages, we are reminded that history is rarely black and white. The truth lies in shades of interpretation, where ambition, culture, politics, and chance intertwine. As you imagine the fleet sailing home laden with treasures and tales, consider the debates that continue to ripple across time, how one era's grandeur can be another's question mark. Next, we will explore the enduring legacy of the eunuchs beyond exploration, their complex roles in Chinese politics and society. Section 13. The Eunuchs' Legacy Beyond Exploration. As the echoes of the great voyages fade into history, the story of eunuchs in China continues, not just as explorers, but as powerful figures influencing the empire's politics, culture, and society for centuries to come. Tonight, we'll explore the broader legacy of these unique individuals, understanding how their roles extended far beyond the seas and into the heart of China's complex imperial world. Imagine the grand halls of the Forbidden City, where the scent of incense lingers, silk banners flutter softly, and beneath ornate ceilings, eunuchs move with quiet purpose. Their influence touched every corner of the empire, from the emperor's private chambers to the farthest provinces. Eunuchs were administrators, diplomats, artists, and sometimes even kingmakers, weaving the intricate tapestry of imperial power with deft hands. Historically, eunuchs served as trusted servants because they could not create rival dynasties. Without families of their own, they were seen as loyal and less likely to act selfishly, making them ideal confidants of emperors wary of palace intrigue. Yet, over time, some eunuchs gained immense power, controlling access to the emperor and influencing decisions at the highest levels. This paradox of power and vulnerability defined their complex place in society. Their influence peaked during the Ming Dynasty, especially in the 15th and 16th centuries. It was an era when eunuchs like Zheng He commanded fleets that traversed oceans, while others oversaw imperial workshops crafting exquisite porcelain or managed vast networks of officials and palace staff. Eunuchs acted as the emperor's eyes and ears, ensuring loyalty and order throughout the sprawling empire. One fascinating aspect of eunuch power was their ability to act as intermediaries between the emperor and the bureaucracy. Scholar officials who had studied Confucian classics and passed rigorous exams often resented eunuchs for their influence, viewing them as meddlesome outsiders lacking proper training or pedigree. Yet emperors relied on eunuchs for their loyalty and discretion, valuing their ability to navigate palace politics and maintain control. Eunuchs were involved in everything from the daily management of palace affairs, such as overseeing the emperor's schedule, managing servants, and organizing ceremonies, to supervising construction projects like the Forbidden City itself. Some even commanded elite imperial guards wielding military power within the capital. Beyond their official duties, some eunuchs became wealthy and influential beyond measure. They sponsored artists, collected rare books, and patronized religious institutions, leaving cultural legacies that endure to this day. Imagine lavish parties thrown in quiet palace chambers where eunuchs adorned in sumptuous robes and jewelry mingled with poets, painters, and philosophers, fostering a vibrant cultural scene hidden behind palace walls. A quirky fact to imagine is that some eunuchs were known for their extravagant tastes, commissioning robes embroidered with dragons, and phoenixes, jewelry set with precious stones, and even organizing lavish festivities that rivaled those of nobles. Despite their official status as servants, these displays of opulence challenged the social norms of the day. Yet despite their power, eunuchs often faced deep social stigma. Their physical condition, castration, made them outsiders in a society that valued family lineage and traditional masculinity. This paradox shaped their identity and roles in complex ways. They lived lives marked by sacrifice and contradiction, wielding power without heirs, trusted yet mistrusted, central yet marginalized. Historians still debate whether eunuchs were stabilizing forces within the palace or sources of corruption and intrigue. Some argue that eunuchs helped check the power of the nobility and bureaucrats, serving as counterbalances that protected imperial authority. Others blame them for fostering factionalism, mismanagement, and weakening governance through favoritism and personal ambition. Beyond politics, eunuchs influenced culture profoundly. They contributed to literature, theatre, and art, sometimes serving as writers, performers, or patrons. Their unique perspectives enriched Chinese cultural life, adding new dimensions to poetry, drama, and visual arts. Some eunuchs were talented calligraphers and painters, their works treasured by connoisseurs. Their roles also extended to religion. Many eunuchs became devoted followers of Buddhism or Taoism, building temples, supporting monks, and funding religious ceremonies. This spiritual dimension added depth to their public lives and allowed them to seek solace from the complex pressures of palace life. The legacy of eunuchs is not limited to the Ming Dynasty. Their influence continued in later periods, though often fluctuating with political tides. Some emperors relied heavily on eunuchs, while others tried to curb their power, reflecting the ongoing tension within imperial governance. Interestingly, eunuchs appeared in many other cultures, ancient Egypt, Rome, Byzantium, but the Chinese imperial system developed one of the most extensive and institutionalized eunuch classes in history. The scale and permanence of their roles in China were unique, shaping the empire's trajectory in profound ways. As you imagine the eunuchs walking palace corridors, silent, watchful, indispensable, you realize they were more than servants. They were shapers of an empire's destiny. Their lives intertwined with the fate of emperors, the rise and fall of dynasties, and the unfolding of history itself. Their stories reveal much about power's paradoxes, how it can be wielded from the shadows, how outsiders can become insiders, and how loyalty can coexist with suspicion. Their lives were marked by contradictions, powerful yet powerless, visible yet invisible, influential yet vulnerable. This complexity makes their story endlessly fascinating, offering a window into the tensions and balances of imperial China. So as you drift to sleep, picture the eunuch's world, a place of secrets, silk, and shadow, where loyalty and ambition intertwined in ways both subtle and profound. Next, we'll delve into the mysterious end of the Treasure Fleet era, uncovering the reasons behind the sudden halt in China's maritime adventures. Section 14. The mysterious end of the Treasure Fleet era. The sun slowly sets on the era of the great treasure fleets, and with it, China's grand maritime adventures come to a mysterious and sudden halt. After decades of breathtaking voyages, massive ships, and diplomatic successes, the fleets vanished from the seas. The emperor's ships stopped sailing, and the vast expeditions that once reached faraway lands faded into history. Tonight, we will explore the puzzling reasons behind this sudden stop, examining political, economic, cultural, and practical factors that led to the disappearance of the treasure fleets, and think about the many questions that still puzzle historians today. Imagine the once bustling shipyards full of hammering, sawing, and shouting, now growing quiet. The busy ports that had been alive with sailors, merchants, and officials preparing for long journeys fell silent. The grand treasure ships, their sails furled for the last time, rested peacefully at anchor. Where did these ships go? Why did these extraordinary expeditions, which had shown China's power to the world, suddenly stop? For centuries, scholars have debated these questions, and the answers are complex and many-layered. One major factor behind the end was the changing political climate inside China itself. After Emperor Yongle, the great champion of the Voyages, died, his successors showed little enthusiasm for continuing the costly and ambitious expeditions. Court politics shifted as different groups gained influence, particularly the scholar officials, also called mandarins, who were deeply rooted in Confucian traditions and values. These officials favored focusing on agriculture, maintaining internal order, defending the empire's borders, and preserving established customs. They believed that China should concentrate on its vast land and people rather than distant overseas adventures. To these officials, the treasure voyages appeared expensive, extravagant, and distracting. They worried that pouring enormous resources into maintaining huge fleets would drain the empire's treasury, leaving the state weak and unprepared for threats, especially from northern nomadic tribes like the Mongols and later the Manchus, who were pressing on China's borders. These concerns grew louder over time, and the voyages increasingly lost support at court. At the same time, there was a growing cultural and ideological shift in China. Confucianism, the dominant philosophy, emphasized stability, hierarchy, respect for tradition, and the importance of rural, agricultural life. Many scholars viewed maritime trade and exploration as unnecessary, even harmful. They feared that such overseas ventures encouraged greed, moral decay, and social disorder. This cultural tension influenced important policy decisions, including strict rules limiting shipbuilding and overseas travel. One famous decree banned the construction of ships larger than a certain size, effectively ending the building of the enormous treasure ships. Another law severely restricted private maritime trade, aiming to control who could travel and trade abroad. These restrictions cut off official support for large-scale voyages and signaled a retreat from maritime engagement. Economics also played a role in the decline. Maintaining fleets the size of Zheng He's required vast quantities of high-quality timber, skilled laborers, sailors, navigators, and funding for provisions and gifts. Over time, the availability of suitable timber declined as forests were depleted. Skilled shipwrights and sailors retired or died, and the costs of such massive endeavors became increasingly hard to justify or manage. Natural disasters during this period, floods, droughts, and famines, further strained China's economy and distracted the government from supporting expensive maritime missions. The empire's resources were redirected toward disaster relief and rebuilding efforts on land. The fleet itself faced practical problems. The complexity of organizing and coordinating hundreds of ships on long voyages grew more difficult as interest waned. Shipyards declined in capacity, and the quality of craftsmanship suffered. Experienced crews became scarce, reducing the fleet's effectiveness and safety. Meanwhile, piracy and regional conflicts made the seas more dangerous. As local powers asserted themselves, the once safe trade routes became riskier. Without strong official fleets patrolling and protecting these waters, merchants faced greater threats. Some historians suggest geopolitical reasons also influenced the decision to halt the voyages. China's leaders may have concluded that asserting dominance through land-based power, fortifications and diplomacy was safer and more practical than investing in costly and uncertain naval expeditions. The empire's focus shifted to defending its vast borders, maintaining order and supporting agriculture and civil governance. Others proposed that the voyages were largely symbolic from the start, designed to demonstrate imperial prestige to foreign states and impress domestic audiences. Once these goals were achieved, maintaining such an expensive fleet no longer seemed necessary. Another interesting idea is that many of the massive treasure ships were dismantled or repurposed for defense against internal rebellions or foreign invasions. As the Navy's mission narrowed, its focus turned from projecting power overseas to protecting coastal regions from pirates and enemies. Meanwhile, far across the seas, European powers like Portugal and Spain were beginning their own age of exploration. These nations, driven by new navigational technologies and imperial ambitions, sailed beyond their own shores, discovering new lands and establishing colonies. The contrast between China's withdrawal and Europe's push outward raises fascinating questions about how global history unfolded. It is important to remember that although official state-sponsored expeditions ended, Chinese merchants, sailors, and fishermen continued to engage in maritime trade and settlement. The spirit of adventure and commerce lived on among ordinary people, even as imperial support faded. Archaeological discoveries show that Chinese goods, culture, and influence spread widely in Southeast Asia and beyond, long after the treasure fleet stopped sailing. Chinese ceramics, coins, and other artifacts have been found in distant ports, evidence of continued contact. The abrupt halt to the treasure fleets left a lasting legacy of mystery and what-ifs. What might have happened if China had continued its naval dominance? Could the world's political and economic balance have shifted? Could China have prevented European colonization in Asia or Africa? Historians today still explore these questions, piecing together clues from ancient documents, shipwrecks, and foreign accounts. Each new discovery adds to our understanding, but also deepens the mystery. As you imagine the silent docks and empty shipyards, the fading echoes of sails flapping in the wind, feel the weight of change. How empires rise and fall, how ambitions grow and shrink like the tides. The end of the treasure fleet era marked a turning point not only for China but for the world's maritime balance of power. It closed a chapter of extraordinary seafaring and opened a new one dominated by different players and priorities. So, as you settle into dreams tonight, picture the great ships resting in quiet harbors, their stories sailing on in history's waves. Next, we'll reflect on the curious lives of eunuch explorers and what their journeys reveal about power, identity, and the human spirit. Section 15. Reflections on Power, Identity, and Adventure. As we come to the closing chapter of this journey through the extraordinary lives of China. As eunuch explorers and their legendary voyages, it is time to pause and reflect deeply. Beyond the vast ships, diplomatic triumphs, and sprawling trade networks, these stories reveal profound truths about power, identity, ambition, and the human spirit. Tonight, let us explore the curious lives of these eunuchs and what their experiences teach us about belonging and the nature of adventure itself. Imagine a man, once a boy, taken from his family, cast into a life unlike any other, marked by sacrifice and transformation. Eunuchs were men who had undergone castration, a practice that removed their traditional markers of masculinity, but opened for them a unique place within the rigid hierarchy of imperial China. This physical alteration was not just a biological fact, it shaped their very identities, their social roles, and the way they saw themselves and were seen by others. The paradox of eunuchs is striking. On the one hand, they were outsiders, Unable to marry, unable to have children, separated forever from the family structures that defined most men's lives. Society often viewed them with suspicion or disdain, stigmatizing their condition as unnatural or pitiable. Yet on the other hand, eunuchs gained incredible influence and power, sometimes surpassing nobles and scholars. Their closeness to the emperor and the trust placed in them granted access to secrets and decisions few others could approach. Zheng He's life embodies this paradox. Born into a Muslim family in Yunnan province, he was captured as a child during military conflicts and castrated, a fate that must have been both terrifying and bewildering. But through sheer skill, intelligence, and loyalty, he rose to become the commander of the greatest fleet the world had ever seen. His voyages carried him across oceans and cultures, linking distant peoples through diplomacy and trade. Yet despite his power and renown, Zheng He's story remained shadowed by his eunuch status, marked by both privilege and exclusion. What can we learn from such a life? The eunuchs challenge our assumptions about identity and belonging. They show us that power does not always follow traditional paths, and that human ambition can find expression in unexpected forms. They remind us that those who seem marginalized may hold central roles in shaping history. Eunuchs were often forced to navigate complex social landscapes, balancing loyalty to the emperor with their own survival in a world that both empowered and marginalized them. Their unique position gave them access to inner circles, but also made them targets of envy and resentment. Court intrigue was a constant reality, and their lives demanded both cunning and resilience. Beyond politics, eunuchs contributed richly to the culture of their time. Many became patrons of the arts, commissioning works of painting, literature, and architecture. Some were writers and poets, expressing their experiences and emotions in subtle and moving ways. Their perspectives, forged in the tensions of their identities, enriched Chinese cultural heritage. Spiritually, eunuchs often sought solace and meaning in Buddhism and Taoism. Many sponsored temples, monks, and religious ceremonies, seeking comfort in faith amidst the uncertainties of their lives. This spiritual dimension added complexity to their public roles and private struggles. The story of eunuchs also invites us to reflect on the nature of ambition and adventure. Their journeys, both literal and metaphorical, took them far beyond ordinary limits. Zheng He's voyages connected continents and cultures, symbolizing human curiosity and the drive to explore. Yet these ambitions were always framed within constraints, social, political, and physical. Their lives highlight the interplay of power and vulnerability. Eunuchs wielded great influence but lived with constant threats, from rivals, political purges, or shifts in imperial favor. Their position was both elevated and precarious. This tension reflects broader human experiences. How do individuals seek meaning and agency in worlds that limit them? How do we define ourselves when traditional roles are denied or transformed? Eunuch stories are windows into these universal questions. As you picture eunuchs moving silently through palace halls, managing affairs, or commanding fleets, remember that behind the grandeur were lives marked by sacrifice, complexity, and the search for belonging. Their stories ask us to reconsider definitions of strength, loyalty, and identity. They remind us that history's shaping forces come from diverse and sometimes overlooked voices. The voyages of the treasure fleets were not just about expanding an empire's reach. They were about individuals reaching beyond their circumstances and navigating a world both vast and uncertain. Section 16. The Global Ripple Effects of Ming Maritime Expeditions. When Zheng He's grand fleet set sail from China in the early 1400s, it was not just a simple journey across the seas. These voyages sent ripples that spread far and wide, shaping trade, diplomacy, culture, and politics across Asia, Africa, and even farther. Tonight, let us dive deep into how the Ming maritime expeditions left lasting marks on the early modern world, connecting distant lands in ways that still resonate today. Imagine the world as it was then, not connected by airplanes, phones, or the internet, but alive with trade routes and stories traveling over land and sea. The Indian Ocean, a vast body of water, was like a busy highway where merchants, sailors, and travelers from China, Southeast Asia, India, the Middle East, and East Africa met and exchanged goods, ideas, and cultures. Zheng He's fleet entered this lively network, bringing fresh energy, power, and connections. One of the biggest effects of these voyages was the strengthening and expansion of trade networks. The Ming fleet visited important ports that were already trading centers, but their arrival made trade safer and more organized. Local rulers, impressed by the massive ships and power they represented, offered protection and privileges to Chinese merchants. This made trading easier and encouraged more merchants to travel these routes. Goods flowed both ways. China sent out silk, beautiful porcelain, tea, and other luxury products. In return, they brought back spices like cloves and nutmeg, precious gems, rare woods, and even exotic animals such as giraffes and zebras. This exchange enriched marketplaces, changed diets and tastes, and added new riches to many lands. The voyages also helped spread ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. For example, Chinese skills in navigation, shipbuilding, and farming were shared along the trade routes. At the same time, foreign art, architecture, religious beliefs, and customs found their way back to China, creating a unique blend of cultures. The voyages were not just about trade, they built diplomatic ties too. Many foreign kings and rulers sent tribute missions to the Ming emperor after meeting Zheng He's fleet, creating formal relationships that encouraged peace and cooperation. This network of tribute states helped reduce conflicts and open doors for new opportunities. In some places, the fleet's visits affected politics. For instance, in parts of Southeast Asia, the Ming fleet's presence helped support friendly rulers, discouraged piracy, and stopped rebellions. This created stability and encouraged economic growth that lasted for generations. Another important impact was the growth of Chinese communities overseas. Sailors, merchants, and settlers established small Chinese neighborhoods in ports from Southeast Asia to East Africa. These communities acted as cultural bridges, spreading the Chinese language, festivals, food, and traditions far from home. Some scholars argue that these connections were an early form of globalization, coming decades before Europe's famous age of exploration. Zheng He's voyages showed how a powerful, peaceful empire could link continents through trade and friendship rather than war or conquest. Yet, the influence of these voyages had limits. Unlike later European powers, the Ming fleet did not seek to colonize or take over foreign lands. Instead, their focus was on showing China's strength, gaining tribute, and securing trade. So while China's influence spread, it was often symbolic or indirect. The fleet also inspired advances in technology and navigation. The design of the treasure ships impressed many foreign shipbuilders. Ideas about compasses, maps, and sailing techniques spread to new regions, improving navigation and sea travel worldwide. Religion and culture were part of this exchange too. Zheng He was Muslim, and his respectful treatment of Islamic customs helped build friendships with Muslim rulers. Meanwhile, Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, and Islam mixed along the trade routes, creating diverse spiritual communities. Art and literature also flourished because of these voyages. Chinese porcelain with foreign patterns, stories of distant lands told in poetry, and architecture that mixed styles all show how cultures met and influenced each other. Though official voyages ended after a few decades, their effects continued. Trade routes stayed open, diplomatic relationships endured, and cultural exchanges continued through merchants and migrants. Historians still debate how big the ripple effects truly were. Some see Zheng He's voyages as the peak of Chinese maritime power that might have changed global history if sustained. Others view them as impressive but temporary events in a world of changing powers. One thing is clear, these voyages showed the possibilities of peaceful global connection centuries before many parts of the world experienced similar links. Imagine the grand ships sailing distant oceans carrying goods, ideas, and goodwill, knitting the world closer together in a way that shaped the centuries to come. To better understand the voyage's effects, let's look closer at specific regions. Southeast Asia. In the Malay archipelago, where modern Indonesia and Malaysia lie, trade thrived long before Zheng He arrived. The fleet AS visits boosted local economies by making seas safer and strengthening rulers who welcomed the Ming Emperor's recognition. For example, Malacca, a small port city, grew into a major trading hub because of these relationships. The fleet helped stop pirates and encouraged merchants to settle there. Chinese goods were highly prized. Local artisans even began making porcelain inspired by Chinese designs, blending them with local styles. This cultural mix enriched art and craft traditions in the region. South Asia. Along India's west coast, ports like Calicut and Cochin were buzzing with activity. The fleet engaged with rulers who controlled the spice trade, and the exchange went beyond goods to ideas. Zheng He's envoys learned about local religions and customs, while Indian influences reached China. These visits helped ease tensions between rival kingdoms and created more stable trade environments. The Arabian Peninsula cities, such as Aden and Hormuz, were critical crossroads. The Chinese fleet's presence opened new markets for goods like frankincense and myrrh and helped connect trade routes leading to Europe and Africa. Zheng He's Muslim heritage was a bridge here, helping establish mutual respect and cooperation with Muslim leaders. East Africa. Along the Swahili coast, the fleet visited cities like Kilwa and Mogadishu. These were rich trading centers exchanging gold, ivory, and spices. The locals were amazed by the huge Chinese ships and the exotic gifts they brought. The Chinese influence can still be seen in some African art and architecture. Challenges remained, though. Language differences made communication difficult. The fleet had skilled interpreters, but misunderstandings sometimes happened. Some rulers resisted China's tribute system, fearing loss of autonomy. At sea, the crew faced storms, pirates, and disease. But the leadership and discipline kept the fleet together. The voyages were a reminder of humanity's desire to explore, connect, and learn. They offer a powerful example of peaceful cultural exchange and cooperation in a world often torn by conflict. So as you imagine these ships crossing oceans and building bridges across cultures, remember the ripple effects that changed lives and shaped history. Next, we will uncover the mysteries surrounding the disappearance of the treasure fleet and the stories that still fascinate historians today. Section 17: The Disappearance of the Treasure Fleet. Myth, mystery, and modern discoveries. The story of Zheng He's treasure fleet is filled with grandeur, adventure, and astonishing feats of navigation. Yet, one of the most puzzling chapters is how this mighty fleet vanished from the oceans and from history's spotlight. Tonight, let's dive into the mysterious end of the treasure fleet, exploring the myths that grew around it, the secrets it left behind, and the modern efforts to uncover what really happened to these colossal ships and their crews. Picture the scene after the final voyages. The massive wooden ships docked in quiet harbors, the sailors returning home, and the enormous treasure cargoes unloaded. Slowly, the once busy shipyards fell silent. The huge vessels, some said to be the largest wooden ships ever built, disappeared from records, as if swallowed by the sea or forgotten by time. Where did they go? What caused the sudden halt to this incredible maritime era? Over the centuries, many legends have arisen about the fate of the fleet. Some stories say the ships were deliberately scuttled or burned to prevent their use by enemies or rebellious forces. Others claim the fleet was destroyed in fierce storms or attacked by pirates. Some tales even suggest the fleet sailed off to distant, unknown lands, never to return. For a long time, little physical evidence supported these stories. The vast wooden ships exposed to sea and time left few traces. Historians and archaeologists relied on old texts, travelers' tales, and rare artifacts to piece together the fleet's end. In recent decades, however, advances in archaeology and technology have begun to shed light on the mystery. Underwater explorations near China's coast and in some distant ports have uncovered shipwrecks and artifacts that may be linked to the treasure fleets. These discoveries offer clues about the ship's construction, routes, and possible disasters. One fascinating finding is the remnants of shipbuilding sites and timber used in fleet construction. These sites show the scale of the operation and the sophisticated techniques employed by Ming shipwrights. Some discovered anchors and ceramics hint at long voyages and wide trade networks. Modern research also explores the political context of the fleet's disappearance. Records indicate that after Zheng He's death, the Ming court grew wary of the eunuch-led expeditions. Powerful scholar officials criticized the voyages as wasteful and distracting. In a dramatic shift, the government issued bans on large shipbuilding and overseas travel. It's possible many treasure ships were dismantled and repurposed, or left to decay. The focus shifted to defending coastal regions and managing internal affairs. This political retreat may explain why the fleet's legacy faded. In addition to political causes, natural disasters may have played a role. Powerful typhoons and storms could have sunk ships, disrupting further expeditions. The loss of experienced sailors and leaders also weakened the fleet's capabilities. The mystery of the treasure fleet's end captured imaginations worldwide. Writers, filmmakers, and historians have explored the story, blending fact and fiction in tales of lost ships and hidden treasures. In popular culture, Zheng He's fleet sometimes appears as a symbol of lost knowledge and ambition, an early example of global exploration that ended too soon. Despite the gaps in knowledge, ongoing research continues to uncover new pieces of this puzzle. Each shipwreck found, each document studied, adds to our understanding. The fleet's disappearance reminds us of how history can be lost and found again, like treasures buried beneath the waves. As you picture the silent docks and empty shipyards, the stories of vanished ships and forgotten sailors invite wonder and curiosity. These mysteries keep the spirit of the voyages alive, inspiring future explorers and historians. So tonight, let your mind sail with the treasure fleet into the unknown, carrying dreams of discovery and the deep, endless sea. Next, we will reflect on the lessons we can learn from these eunuch explorers for our own times. Section 18. Lessons from the Eunuch. Explorers for today's world. As our journey through the life and legacy of China's eunuch explorers draws to a close, it's worth pausing to reflect on what these stories can teach us today. Zheng He and his fleet offer more than just tales of distant seas and grand voyages. They reveal insights about leadership, cultural exchange, resilience, and the challenges of navigating complex worlds. Tonight, we'll explore the valuable lessons their adventures hold for our modern, interconnected age. Embracing complexity in leadership. Zheng He's career was shaped by navigating a world of complexity, political, cultural, and personal. His success depended on balancing many forces, the demands of the emperor, the ambitions of court factions, the practical challenges of sailing vast distances, and the delicate art of diplomacy with diverse peoples. Today's leaders face similar challenges: the ability to manage competing interests, to understand different cultures, and to adapt to changing circumstances remains essential. Zheng He's story reminds us that leadership is not about control alone, but about listening, flexibility, and building alliances. Despite being a eunuch, someone marginalized by society, Zheng He rose to become one of the most powerful and respected figures of his time. His life teaches us to recognize talent and leadership in unexpected places and to value diverse perspectives. Inclusivity and openness can strengthen communities and organizations, just as they helped Zheng He build successful missions. The power of cultural exchange. The Voyages opened channels of communication between distant civilizations, fostering understanding and respect across cultures. Gifts were exchanged, ideas shared, and customs observed with curiosity and honor. This peaceful interaction contrasts with many later periods of conquest and conflict. In today's globalized world, cultural exchange remains vital. The Ming Treasure Fleets show that building bridges based on respect and mutual benefit can enrich societies. Learning from different traditions, embracing diversity, and fostering dialogue help reduce tensions and create stronger bonds. Zheng He's respect for foreign cultures, his participation in religious ceremonies, his willingness to learn local customs, offers a model for modern diplomacy and international relations. Genuine curiosity and humility open doors that power alone cannot. Navigating risk and uncertainty. Sailing unknown seas was fraught with danger. Storms, pirates, disease, and political rivalries threatened every voyage. Yet Zheng He and his crews faced these risks with preparation, discipline, and resilience. Today's world is full of uncertainties, economic shifts, climate change, political unrest. The Eunuch explorer's story encourages us to prepare thoughtfully, to build strong teams and to maintain calm in crises. Flexibility and courage are as important now as they were then. The role of vision and ambition. Zheng He's voyages were driven by bold ambition and vision, reaching far horizons, expanding the empire's influence peacefully, and connecting peoples. Such vision inspired extraordinary efforts, pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible. Modern societies and individuals can draw inspiration from this daring spirit. Ambition, when combined with wisdom and respect for others, can lead to breakthroughs in science, culture, and human relations. Yet the eventual end of the Voyages reminds us that ambition must be balanced with practical realities. Economic costs, political support, and cultural values all influence what can be sustained. Understanding identity and belonging. The eunuchs lived lives marked by paradox. Their physical conditions set them apart, yet their roles placed them at the empire's center. They negotiated identities shaped by power and exclusion, loyalty and suspicion. This complexity resonates today as societies grapple with questions of identity, inclusion, and belonging. The eunuch explorers' stories invite empathy for those whose lives do not fit traditional molds, and recognition that identity can be fluid and multifaceted. Their experience shows that individuals can shape history even when faced with marginalization, challenging stereotypes, and expanding ideas of who can lead and contribute. Learning from history's what-ifs. The mysterious halt of the Treasure Fleet and China's retreat from maritime exploration raise intriguing questions. What might have happened if these voyages had continued? Could China have changed the course of global history? While we can only speculate, these what-ifs remind us that history is shaped by choices. Decisions about priorities, resources, and values have far-reaching consequences. Reflecting on past successes and failures can guide present decisions in governance, economics, and international relations. The importance of adaptation. The Ming Dynasty's shifting policies, supporting the voyages then abruptly ending them, show how political and cultural factors influence progress. While the voyages represented a high point, changing ideas about identity and security led to a new direction. Modern societies face similar challenges: how to balance tradition with innovation, stability with exploration. The eunuch explorer's story encourages open-mindedness and adaptability, while respecting core values. Promoting peaceful engagement. Zheng He's voyages were remarkable for their peaceful nature. Rather than conquest, they emphasized diplomacy, tribute, trade, and mutual respect. This approach fostered goodwill across vast distances. In a world still troubled by conflicts and competition, this model of peaceful engagement offers hope. Building relationships through understanding and cooperation can solve problems more effectively than force. The human spirit of exploration. At its heart, the Treasure Fleet story is about human curiosity and the desire to explore. Sailing into unknown waters, meeting new peoples, learning and sharing, these impulses drive progress and connection. Today, exploration takes many forms: scientific discovery, cultural exchange, space travel, and digital innovation. The Eunuch explorers remind us to honor this spirit of adventure with responsibility and respect. Courage in the face of limits. Despite enormous challenges from harsh seas to political opposition, the Eunuchs pressed on. Their courage, determination, and teamwork made these extraordinary voyages possible. This courage is timeless. It teaches us that even when limits seem fixed, perseverance and collaboration can achieve great things. A legacy of stories and inspiration. Finally, the lives of Zheng He and the Eunuch explorers leave a rich legacy of stories, of ambition, complexity, and humanity. They inspire us to look beyond appearances, to appreciate diverse talents, and to seek connections across differences. Their journeys encourage us to imagine new possibilities for cooperation and understanding in our own time. As you settle down tonight, picture the great ships rocking gently on distant seas, the soft voices of sailors sharing tales, and the endless horizon inviting you to dream boldly. Thank you for joining this voyage through history. May these lessons guide you as you navigate your own adventures. In closing, the legacy of China's Eunuch explorers invites us to dream boldly, embrace complexity, and find connection even in difference. So, as you settle into rest, imagine the gentle sway of ancient ships, the quiet footsteps of eunuchs in moonlit corridors, and the endless horizon of human possibility. May your dreams carry you on voyages of discovery, courage, and understanding. Thank you for joining this journey. Sweet dreams.